In the U.S., there's very little difference between college and university. It can be about size. So it typically, if something's called a college, it's going to be a little bit smaller in size. Universities tend to be larger, but you can find universities that only have 1,500 students, and you can find colleges that have 10,000 students. So in the U.S., it's really a nomenclature thing. The big difference is universities have more academic divisions. So colleges typically don't have graduate programs. You know, you guys are going to be looking at undergraduate programs typically. You might later look at graduate programs. Universities are going to have multiple colleges a lot of times, and so they might have like a college of business or a college of engineering, college of medicine, college of nursing. You know, so that's the real difference. But having said that, you know, in universities, sometimes colleges are only, like a college of medicine may only be for graduate programs, may only be MDs and things like that. So I wouldn't get caught up in that. Now in Canada, there's a big difference between colleges and universities. In Canada, universities are actually give bachelor's degrees, and colleges do not. So colleges in Canada are a little bit more like community colleges in the US. You know, you can study and do higher education programs, but those programs are not, you know, 4-year bachelor programs. To some degree, you might be able to find returning rate. Do you guys, what did we call it there? What was the term we used?
Admissions profile.
Okay.
Oh, percent admitted, percent returning after first year.
Okay.
Graduation.
That's what helps.
Let's see. Freshman, sophomore. Okay, yeah. Okay. So one way to find that number out, retention rate. Okay. So for instance, so some numbers get used frequently. So you know the admit rate, right? So out of 100 people, how many are admitted when they apply? The yield rate. Did I talk about yield rate before? Okay. Yield or yield rate. Yeah. So this is when the school is so say a school offers admission. It's a big school, say Penn State. They offer admission to 10,000 people. The yield rate is how many of those 10,000 people, well, 100 people, it's a rate, it's a percentage. But what percentage say yes? You know, so if a school offers admission to 10,000 people and 2,500 say yes, the admit rate is, the yield rate is 25%, right? Yeah. So 25%, is that a good or bad yield rate?
Not very.
Yeah, you have no idea.
It's actually pretty average. It's not a bad one. It's not an exceptionally good one.
Is that out of everyone admitted?
Yeah. So a school admits 10,000 people. 2,500 say yes, we're going to come to your school, pay deposits. 25% admit rate. That's pretty good.
What if? So I'm assuming they anticipate a bunch of an amount of people saying no.
Yeah.
What if everyone says yes?
Then they're going to run into problems, and they're going to start going back and saying, okay, who got lower grades in the springtime than we saw in the fall, and
so they wouldn't just do like first people with great deposits.
well, here's the thing. This is all, you know, stats is a big part of this. The people who are in charge of admission offices have a pretty good sense of their yield rate. They should. I mean, if they're off by 0.5%, that could really cause problems at some schools. So they track things based on all sorts of things, by your gender, by ethnicity, by you know, your overall GPA. I mean, they're gonna, whether you're international or domestic, how far away you live from the school. I mean, they have models to try to get at what their yield rate is going to be. So again, they need to know what this is. So I mean, this is one of the other reasons there's a wait list, right? We've never really talked about wait lists, I don't think, but part of the reason there's a wait list is if they're wrong, and say instead of, they expected 25% yield rate, so instead of 2,500 people said yes, only 2,000 people said yes. So that's where the wait list comes in. Oops, we need 500 more people. Well, our wait list has 8,000 people, and half of those people said yes, and okay, so we need to choose people from that list and see if they want to come to our school. So that's where a wait list comes in. What's a good freshman, sophomore retention rate? I mean, what are good, like, what are schools with high retention rates? How high do you think they'll be? What's that? 70% is a little bit low.
90?
National average
Above-
is 75.
Yes.
That's cheating.
And that's crappy. I mean, that's not good. To have, say, 3 out of 4 people leave after the first year, that's bad. And one of the reasons it's so bad is a lot of public universities have bad retention rates. Yeah.
Columbia and Yale retain 99%.
Yes. Okay. So here's the thing: is anything that's over 90% is actually pretty good. Now, I would in retention rates, freshman, sophomore retention rates can be looked at as 2 things. One is how well do they actually financially support students once they get there? Because one reason people leave is they can't afford to go to school anymore. So schools with low, like crappy retention rates, a lot of times it's, hey, they could afford it the first year, and then then problems occurred they couldn't afford it. So you can have schools with a lot of low income students sometimes have low retention rates. It can also mean that they admit a broad range of students, but then they don't care once the students come if they fail or not. Like, okay, we'll admit you. Our admission standards are fairly open. But then if you do poorly, we're fine to let you go too. The other thing it can be, the uber high retention rates. I know you could walk around Columbia University and find people who think Columbia University's, they hate it as freshmen.
Like
And they're
Columbia
like,
University.
I hate this place. I hate the people I'm in school with. I hate my classes. But what?
Big name.
Yeah, but they're like, man, I got into Columbia. I'd be crazy to leave. People still leave, even if they don't like it. But oftentimes, I mean, I had a friend of mine's wife went to Swarthmore. She hated Swarthmore. Her sophomore year, she came to our college, Whitman, and that's where she met my friend, and they later got married. Her junior year, she studied abroad all year. Her senior year, she went back to Swarthmore and graduated. I said, you hate Swarthmore. Why go back? Why not just stay at Whitman? She's like, oh, Swarthmore has a better reputation than Whitman. So, I mean, and that's what happens, is some people make those decisions about, hey, my degree, the name on the degree is more important than the experience I have. So, again, that's why when you're looking at this kind of information, this is how I read some of the stuff. Again, you may agree or disagree with what I have to say, but people who are working in admissions like I did, this is how you start to sort of assess things. And this is how colleges realize these things too about themselves. One thing that can be really good, did any of you come across the, for U.S. universities, NSSE? It's the National Survey of Student Engagement. What they do, the NSSE is something that colleges and universities will have their students take, usually first-year students and seniors. And what it asks them is, how much time do you spend studying? What kind of grades do you get? How much time do you spend doing community service? How much, what do you want to do later on? What's most important to you in terms of postgraduate experiences? How much do you read? How often do you vote? So all these sort of questions, and what they're trying to get at is, how involved are these students in student life? Those of you who are international students applying to U.S. schools, sometimes to complete your application, you need to send in bank documents and things filled out by your parents and all that. Because again, the schools don't want to use up one of their admit slots on you if they know that you can't afford to come. And not all U.S. schools give money to international students. That's a big difference. So Canadian schools, again, for them to provide a visa to international students, you'll at some point have to prove that. But Canadian universities don't ask for that money up front, largely because Canadian universities don't give much money to international students, to non-Canadians.
What if you're a Canadian citizen?
So if you're a Canadian citizen, you're a non-international, you're a domestic applicant to Canada. What gets a little bit complicated with Canada is because there's a lot of Canadians that are not necessarily native English speakers or have native level fluency. And so Canada the only thing that can be a little bit more complicated is whether you need to submit English language proficiency. And that's something that we talk about on an individual basis. Like some schools may require students to take TOEFL, even though to me it doesn't make much sense. But advanced standing means they're giving you credit for work you've done in high school so that you don't start off just as a freshman. You don't start in like a first-year university student, or you get some credit towards it. So, for instance, a lot of American universities will give you credit for doing well on high-level exams. So so maybe you score a 5, 6, or 7 on the IB exam, and they'll give you 4 credits, or they'll give you 8 credits towards your graduation requirements. And again, in the U.S., you usually need, say, 130 credits to graduate. So 4 or 8 isn't that much, but you might get it for several classes. So usually, after you earn about 30 credits, you go from a freshman to a sophomore, first year to second year students. Usually at about 50 to 60 credits, you go from a sophomore or second year student to a third year student, right? So it's 30. It's about 30, 25, or to 30, 50, or 60 that get you there. So what's nice about advanced standing is a lot of times you don't have to take the entry level class. So instead of taking, say you've done economics high level here, you did really well. So maybe you get to skip econ macro and econ micro, the 2 freshman year classes, and you can go right into what generally second year university students are taking. So one of the things that's good about this at places like UCs that tend to have a lot more students, remember, there's a lot of students who come in the first year, freshman, sophomore retention rate, they lose a lot of students, so that there's always sort of a fewer and fewer students as you get in the upper level classes. Those classes tend to be more specialized, so once you start getting in those smaller classes, so you have an easier time getting those classes. So if you can jump that sort of first year where there's the most number of students trying to get into these classes and can get into second year classes, it's easier than to get the classes you need. You also are going to more likely graduate sooner, right? So some students could come in with a year's worth of classes where instead of taking 4 years to graduate, you take 3 years. Now you may not want to do that, but it's at least an option, and that can save money. Like if you're like, okay, well the difference between each year I'm going to pay $30,000 a year to go to college. Well, 3 years is $90,000. 4 years is $120,000. So graduating early can save you money. Also, you got to think that if you graduate a year earlier, that's maybe a year closer to starting work. So you're also not only spending 1 year less where you're paying for things. Given the field you're in, if it's a field that requires a graduate degree, to what degree do they care more about the graduate degree versus undergraduate degree? You know what they called medical doctors who went to crappy undergraduate colleges? Doctors. So if you have an MD, you're a doctor whether you went to the most selective undergraduate program or you went to a college that everyone could get into. They still call you a doctor. Some fields it matters more. Some other key words to look for are prospective students. Prospective student. So that means someone who is maybe looking to be a student at the school. So you all know that word, prospective student? Another word that they use, or a phrase that they use, is future student. So they might say future students. So if you see a tab and it says prospective students, future students, what's the other word? There's another word that they use all the time. It's not as common, but future student is probably a little bit less common than prospective student. Yeah, anyway, so those are words to look for under admission. Also, how many of you looking at the U.S. are international students?
Ryan.
No! Some of you are international students in the U.S., some of you are not. What's the difference?
Non-U.S. citizen.
Okay, yes. So if you do not have U.S. citizenship, and you do not have U.S. permanent residency. I don't know that any of our students have U.S. permanent residency.
It's either the passport. Or
It's very unusual.
We have legal residency.
Well, you're a U.S. citizen,
Oh yeah.
and Ryan, you're a U.S. citizen. But what happens is, so for instance,
Yeah, but-
my wife is Canadian. When she and I moved from Shanghai back to the U.S. and we got married, she could be in the U.S. for up to 6 months, but after that she needed a visa. So the visa, once we got married, she got essentially a U.S. permanent resident visa. And so this allowed her to live in the U.S. and work in the U.S. So the issue is you generally can't get a U.S. permanent residency. Usually it's a green card. You ever heard green card? That's what they mean. So U.S. green card. It's not green anymore. But they still call it a green card. So I don't think I haven't encountered any of our students who have U.S. permanent residency. There might be someone out there.
It's a long flight.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're an international student.